The moment I realized she kept talking to him, I felt the floor tilt. My phone buzzing, my chest tight. I watched the screenshots I never meant to send light up my screen like neon. This wasn't justice anymore. It felt like a dare to the universe. How far would I let this ruin me? If you've ever felt betrayal cut straight through you, you'll know why I pressed send and why I immediately wished I hadn't. If you've ever wanted justice when someone hurts you and you're not sure you can take it, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me. This is a story about heartbreak, rage, and the messy, painful road to self-preservation, and maybe a little bit of healing. The world before the betrayal. I met her at a point in my life when I believed I'd finally found a real partner. She worked at a neighborhood restaurant where she carried a quick laugh and a quick step, and I loved how she could flip a shift into a show, until I started spotting the cracks. There were late-night texts during our dates, comments that lingered a beat too long, and a manager there, a guy who seemed to stroke his own ego with a wink and a word. The flirtation was never a single moment. It was a pattern, a rhythm that beat against the idea of us like a drum line I couldn't ignore. The exact nature of the injustice was this: dirty talk during shifts, compliments that felt rehearsed, photos shared without a care for boundaries, and plans to hang out outside the job where testimony would be harder to collect. I told her clearly, calmly, that she needed to pull back to stop texting the other guy. She said she would. Then, not even a day later, she did the thing she knew would hurt me most. She texted him again, a bright little reminder that she could still shift a relationship's frame on a whim. The rest of me asked, what if she loses something real because of this? What if I harmed people who didn't deserve it? The moral center of me, the part I'd like to trust, told me to stop and examine what I'd become in the heat of hurt. Turning point, the moment of resolve. Late one night, after the initial shock had slowed, I stood in the bathroom mirror and watched my own reflection as if it could lecture me into reason. My hands trembled, my breath shallow, and I felt a flood of self-doubt and anger. The truth hit me like a line drive to the chest. I was defending my dignity by dismantling someone else's. That's not justice. That's revenge masquerading as justice. And if I kept going, I'd lose the last shred of the person I hoped to become, someone who could own their mistakes and still move forward. Revenge planning and execution, the push toward action. But the plan I'd already started couldn't be erased. I didn't pivot to a safer path overnight. I let the momentum ride for a moment, told myself there was a boundary between right and wrong, then crossed it anyway. I drafted a message to the owner of the restaurant. A boundary-crossing move in a world where the boundaries were thin already. I explained what I'd seen, attached the screenshots that painted a clear picture of what was happening at work, and asked him to consider whether there were professional consequences to the personal chaos spilling into the workplace. He replied with what felt like a legal hedge: policy, at-will employment, and the distance between personal life and business operations. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the reality. Meanwhile, the social world around her began to tilt. The boss, the mother, the manager she'd flirted with. You could feel their attention shift the moment the messages disappeared from the phone screens and landed into the public eye. I saw how the act of revenge had eaten at my own self-worth. I watched as the adrenaline faded and the adrenaline's echo remained, a reminder that I had to choose to grow or to drown. My ex's reply to me was a mirror I hadn't wanted to look into. She used words like, "Only a person like you would care to see this happen," and "you're bitter." The exchange spiraled into a name-calling melee that left both of us reeling. It was clear that the damage was already done and that further dialogue would not repair it. I stepped back, breathed, and decided I would not feed the cycle, at least not with more harm. Looking back, I can see my path with brutal clarity, hurt impulse, and a misguided attempt to reclaim dignity. The universe didn't reward me with an instant karmic collapse or a dramatic court of judgment. Instead, it handed me something more challenging and more human, a chance to choose a healthier version of myself. The revenge, as it turned out, was not the screenshots or the social ruin. It was the decision to stop feeding the rage and begin feeding the future. If this story hit you in a place you've known, where betrayal meets the impulse to fight back. Leave a comment with your own experience of what happened after you faced a similar moment. What felt corrective and what felt costly. And if you crave more stories like this, stories about heartbreak, accountability, and the slow road to healing, make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. The immediate payoff is emotional catharsis, not a guaranteed justice. The ex's life is not shattered in a spectacular courtroom moment. She remains employed, but faces a tense, uncomfortable workplace dynamic and a reputational shift within the community. The owner cannot legally terminate her simply for personal indiscretions, especially when the platform to demonstrate fault is limited to private relationships. The restaurant, a place I'd once imagined as a shared space between two people who cared, now felt like a stage where a private life had to perform under a spotlight. The payoff I imagined, what I expected would be a moment of triumph, began to skew toward a different, heavier kind of consequence. The realization that the act was less about her and more about me learning how to bear witness to the truth and choose who I wanted to become after the truth was told. I remember the sound of her voice when I confronted her, the way her laughter felt like a knife in my gut, the weight of the phone in my hand as I pressed send, the cold sting of the air when the messages pinged back with replies I hadn't asked for. I replayed the scene in my head, the shivers you feel when you're done with a person and you realize you're not done with yourself. The look in her eyes when she realized the boundary had become a line in the sand you cannot erase. And then the silence after the storm. A room emptied of the noise that used to fill it. The space where I finally heard my own heart beat again. Her caught? That's adorable. You're overreacting. Me? I'm not the one who's playing with people's trust. Her, relax. This is just a game to you. Me, no. This isn't a game. It's my life. The true payoff wasn't in seeing her stumble publicly or in the quiet satisfaction of proving a point. It came in the slow, stubborn realization that the world keeps turning even when you've turned your back on the best version of yourself. The owner's response, or lack thereof, didn't erase the consequences. You can't erase the fact that the images existed, that the humiliation happened, that the trust was broken in a way that ripples beyond a single relationship. The most striking moment, in hindsight, was the moment of connection I found with the idea of repair. Not repair the relationship with her. She'd made that impossible, but repair within me. She described getting caught as if it were a scene from a movie, a moment of mischief she enjoyed. Hearing that cut deeper than the text itself. The idea of being the doormat, as she framed me in her own mind, gnawed at me. The temptation to fight fire with fire. I trained my attention on the small details, the times, the words, the little confirmations that she cared more about the thrill of the chase than the promise of us. The more she leaned into this, the more I felt the old impulse rise. To defend myself, to prove who I was, to show her she couldn't toy with me without consequences. So I did what I swore I wouldn't do. I took screenshots. I collected the texts, the hours, the places where the flirtation happened, and the tone in which it happened. I didn't just save them for me. I saved them for everyone to see. I didn't plan it like a plan. It almost happened in a reckless momentum. One text, then another, then a message to the guy she'd chosen to flirt with, then to her mother for good measure. It felt like I was squeezing the air from the room and watching her try to breathe through the evidence. The week I pressed send. The first wave came back quickly. Responses from him, mostly silence from her mother, a few unread messages from the boss she was working with. The moment I hit send, time stretched out in a strange calm. The next day, she called me to apologize, not because she'd stopped, but because she was forced to pause and face the consequences of her own actions. The apology sounded hollow, and I could hear the undertone in her voice. Recognition that what I did would shift more than just our relationship. It could shift how people saw her at the restaurant, how they talked about her behind the scenes, the kind of social ripple you can't control. The moral tangle. Was I right to expose this? The rational part of me said yes. She'd treated me as disposable, and this was the only language she seemed to understand.